Have you ever met someone who just seems to get people, like they have this almost, I don't know, superpower, an instinct for how others tick?
Yeah, they understand why people do what they do.
Exactly. Maybe they can even predict what someone might say or how they'll react, or they just spot those tiny shifts in a conversation and connect with anyone seemingly without effort. It really does feel like a superpower, doesn't it?
It absolutely can feel that way.
Hmm.
But what's really fascinating, I think, is that it's not some um, mystical ability. It's actually a learnable skill,
Like any other skill.
pretty much. And this whole deep dive really is designed as your shortcut to unlocking that very skill. We're talking about learning to analyze human behavior, not just through intuition, but through specific observations and proven models.
That's a really powerful idea. So our mission today is basically to give you the tools to become a sharper observer of human nature. And this isn't just about, being curious. Think about it really reading people. Well, it's essential for better relationships, right? For improving communication everywhere in life. And yeah, even protecting yourself from manipulation sometimes.
It's kind of wild when you realize how little of our communication is the actual words we say.
I know, that stat always gets me. Only about 7% is the words.
And a huge chunk, like 55%, comes from body language. Then another 38% is just the tone of voice.
So we're missing a massive amount if we're only listening to the words spoken.
Absolutely. And connecting this to the big picture, our goal here isn't just about developing hunches or, relying only on gut feelings. It's more about making informed, well, best guesses,
How do we do that?
by gathering good quality data observations and then applying some intelligent analysis. We're going to learn to look for patterns, what are sometimes called message clusters.
Clusters, you mean how different signals work together?
Exactly. Not just looking at one isolated action or expression, but seeing the whole picture.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive into those invisible drivers, the things that really make us tick. First up, the pleasure principle. Sounds pretty fundamental.
It really is. It's universal. And it makes people surprisingly predictable, actually. Almost every decision we make, conscious or not, boils down to either gaining pleasure or avoiding pain.
Simple as that.
At its core, yes.
Yeah.
But what's particularly insightful is that the drive to avoid pain is often much, much stronger than the desire to gain pleasure.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, think about it like this.
Yeah.
You're in a desert. There's a treasure chest nearby, but there's also a wildfire spreading fast.
Right.
You can prioritize escaping that fire, aren't you? Even if it means leaving the treasure behind. Survival instinct just overrides everything else.
Okay, that makes sense. So if it's our perception of pleasure and pain driving us, how does that make us vulnerable? Maybe to manipulation or even fooling ourselves?
That's a great question. Because those perceptions can be, deeply flawed sometimes.
Oh, so
Take the idea of, say, chili-flavored grasshoppers. Your perception of eating an insect might instantly make you feel disgusted, right?
yeah, probably.
Even if someone swears they're delicious. The idea, the perception of repulsion, drives you away, not the actual taste itself.
Oh, no.
And this also explains why immediate gratification often wins out over long-term consequences. The smoker knows cigarettes are bad long-term.
But the craving now is stronger.
Exactly. The immediate craving, or avoiding that headache right now, wins. Emotion often overrides logic. It's a bit like knowing you should eat this salad, but that slice of cake just looks so much better in the moment.
Okay, so from those primal drives, let's climb up the ladder a bit to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the famous pyramid. It feels like a classic, but still such a useful model for understanding motivation.
It really is. Maslow's hierarchy gives us this clear ladder of evolving human needs and desires. It starts right at the bottom with physiological fulfillment.
Food, water, shelter. The basics.
Exactly. Without those, it's really hard to focus on anything else.
Yeah.
Once those are reasonably met, you move up to safety.
So like having a secure income, a stable place to live.
Precisely. Feeling safe and secure in your environment.
Okay, so once someone feels fed and safe, what's next on the pyramid?
Then comes love and belonging. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, aren't we? Isolation often leads to, mental instability. So this stage is all about building relationships, friends, family, community.
Makes sense. And after belonging.
After that, it's self-esteem. Feeling confident, feeling supported, achieving things, earning respect from others.
And the top, the peak of the pyramid.
That's self-actualization. This is about living for something higher than just yourself, connecting with principles, morality, creativity, finding your purpose.
This makes so much sense, and it would completely change how you interact with someone if you had an idea where they were on that pyramid.
Oh, absolutely. Knowing where they are tells you what's likely motivating them right now.
Yeah, can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a counselor at a women's shelter. When a woman first arrives, maybe fleeing domestic violence, her absolute primary concern is physical safety and basic needs, shelter, food.
Right. The bottom level.
Exactly. Trying to talk to her immediately about, say, self-love workbooks would be totally ineffective, maybe even counterproductive.
Because her focus is survival.
Right. But fast forward a few months. That same woman, now feeling physically safe, her basic needs met, might then be focused on belonging, on making connections, finding companionship.
So the counselor's approach needs to change.
Completely. The counselor adapts her approach to match the woman's current stage on the hierarchy. Motivations shift dramatically depending on where someone is on that ladder. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many misunderstandings could be avoided if we just pause to consider where someone might be on this pyramid.
That's a really practical application. Now let's dig even deeper into some of those unconscious drivers. Jung's shadow and the inner child. The shadow sounds a bit dark, mysterious.
Well, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow refers to those disowned, ignored parts of our own nature. The bits we often hide, even from ourselves.
Like what?
Things like pettiness, fear, rage, vanity, aspects we don't like to admit we have. But even though it's unconscious, the shadow subtly influences our behavior, our thoughts, our feelings.
Okay, so understanding someone's shadow, that could actually help us communicate better. That sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, it does, but it often fosters compassion.
Mhm.
If you understand, for instance, that maybe a bully is acting out because they're suppressing their own deep feelings of inferiority or weakness.
You see their behavior differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might see it with more understanding and potentially communicate more deeply, maybe addressing parts of them they don't consciously show. This also brings up something called shadow projection. Have you ever noticed that in action?
You mentioned shadow projection. Can you unpack that a bit? Maybe give an example of something subtle, perhaps, like in a workplace?
Sure. Shadow projection is basically where we attribute our own unwanted traits onto other people. So, for instance, a manager who is constantly criticizing their colleagues for being disorganized or lazy
Yeah.
might actually be unconsciously projecting their own fears about their confidence or maybe their own struggles with managing their workload.
Ah, so they're seeing their own fears in others.
In effect, yes.
Ah.
They're essentially saying, I'm worried I'm disorganized, so you must be the disorganized one. It's like a mask of cleverness or superiority protecting their own feelings of inadequacy. And, identifying the shadow in others can also be a mirror, helping us look more honestly at our own hidden aspects.
Okay. And connected to this is the inner child. I've definitely heard that term used a lot, but how does it relate to reading people?
Well, the inner child represents that unconscious part of us that's like the child we once were, with all its emotions and needs. Disproportionate emotional responses can be a big clue here.
Like what kind of responses?
Like, say, a grown adult throwing a full-on tantrum over something relatively minor. Or a sudden burst of anger that seems way out of proportion to the situation. That can signal someone operating from child mode.
Okay, I can picture that. Like maybe that colleague who always flakes on meetings and then when you try to talk about it, they just pout and sulk.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Recognizing that their behavior might be coming from their naughty, rebellious child part allows you to shift your response.
So,
Instead of getting drawn into the frustration or reacting to the sulking, you might respond more from an adult-to-adult stance. Maybe ask something like, is there something preventing you from communicating openly about this schedule conflict? It's a subtle shift, but it moves from just reacting to the behavior to trying to understand its unconscious root.
okay, that's insightful. Next up on our list of inner drivers, the defense of the ego. Nobody likes being wrong, right, or failing. Our ego really, really doesn't like that.
It certainly does not. And the ego's instinct to protect itself can be incredibly powerful, almost reality-bending sometimes. It can lead to intellectual dishonesty, self-deception.
But these aren't conscious lies.
Not usually. They're mostly unconscious, automatic strategies the mind uses to lessen discomfort and keep the ego feeling safe, like it's not foolish or wrong.
Okay, so what are some of these common ego defense mechanisms we should maybe look out for?
There are several key ones. Denial is probably the most basic, just claiming something negative isn't true.
Like, no, I don't believe that report. I can't be last.
Exactly. And denial is often considered the most dangerous because it means problems get completely ignored. Then there's rationalization,
Making excuses.
pretty much explaining away negatives with justifications. The classic example is the sour grapes fable. The fox can't reach the grapes, so he decides they were probably sour anyway. It protects him from feeling like a failure.
Right. Like saying your boss just has it in for you if you get a bad review, instead of considering maybe you need to improve something.
Exactly. Then there's repression, which is pushing painful thoughts or feelings out of conscious awareness, almost like forgetting them on purpose, though it's unconscious, like sometimes happens with traumatic memories.
Okay. What else?
Displacement. That's redirecting emotions from the original source onto a less threatening target.
Like yelling at your dog when you're really mad at your boss.
A classic example, taking work anger out on family or pets.
Huh.
And projection, which we touched on with the shadow.
Right. Attributing your own stuff to others. How does that work as a defense?
Well, as a defense mechanism, think of a husband who's cheating. He might project his own guilt and shame by becoming intensely suspicious and accusing his wife of cheating.
Wow. Okay.
Then there's reaction formation, expressing the exact opposite of what you truly feel. Like someone terrified of a cancer diagnosis acting overly cheerful and courageous.
Trying to convince themselves, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps. Or just putting on a brave face. Regression is reverting to childlike behavior under stress, like an adult having a temper tantrum over legal troubles. And finally, sublimation, which is actually often seen as a healthier defense, channeling unacceptable impulses into socially acceptable actions.
Like channeling aggression into competitive sports.
Or maybe loneliness into extensive charity work. So yeah, recognizing these mechanisms gives you really deep insight into what people struggle to deal with, and also what they value enough to protect so fiercely. It's like seeing the chinks in their psychological armor, or maybe the armor itself.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's shift gears now from the invisible drivers to the more visible clues. Reading body, face, and speech. We've talked about the why inside, now let's look at the what on the outside. Paul Ekman's work on facial expressions feels crucial here, especially that difference between micro and macro expressions.
Absolutely. Macro expressions are the ones we're more familiar with. They're the more obvious, longer-lasting expressions, lasting up to maybe 4 seconds. And importantly, they can be consciously faked.
Like putting on a smile when you don't feel happy.
Exactly. Micro expressions, though, are different. They're incredibly quick, sometimes as fast as 130th of a second.
Whoa, that's fast.
It is.
Yeah.
And they're generally involuntary. They're like these little, genuine leaks of emotion that bypass our conscious control.
So these are the real tells, the truest indicator of feeling.
They often are, because they're so hard to fake convincingly. Ekman identified 6 universal emotions that tend to show up with specific facial cues, these micro-expressions.
What are they?
Happiness, you see lifted cheeks, wrinkles around the eyes, the Duchenne smile. Sadness often involves a drooping outer eye and downturned lip corners.
Okay.
Disgust, you get that lifted upper lip, narrowed eyes. Anger typically shows lowered, tense eyebrows, maybe tightened eyes.
Huh?
Fear looks somewhat similar, with upward contractions in the forehead, maybe lifted eyelids. And surprise or shock involves elevated, rounded eyebrows and wide open eyes.
But I've heard, and it makes sense, that microexpressions aren't like a foolproof lie detector test. Is that right?
You're right to be cautious. They're definitely valuable clues, but they are not definitive proof of lying.
Yeah.
Well, they often just indicate general nervousness or stress or discomfort, which could be for many reasons other than deception. And honestly, they require really intense observation to even spot reliably. They're a data point, absolutely, but just one piece in the larger analytical puzzle.
Okay, good caveat. Let's move down from the face to the rest of the body. Body language, the unspoken billboard. Joe Navarro, the ex-FBI guy, talks about this as being inbuilt biological communication.
He does, and it's a great way to think about it. Our limbic brain, that more primitive emotional part, is responsible for a lot of these honest automatic responses.
The part that doesn't lie easily.
Right. The prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, is perfectly capable of lying with words, but it has less direct control over these more involuntary bodily signals. That's why even if someone's words are saying one thing, their body might be telling a different story.
What about those really primal responses, fight, flight, freeze? How do they show up in just like normal everyday interactions?
They still manifest, just more subtly. A freeze response might look like someone suddenly becoming very still, or maybe locking their legs around the legs of their chair.
Huh. Anchoring themselves.
Kind of. Flight could be physically leaning away, angling their feet towards the door, creating distance. Fight might show up as more aggressive gestures, maybe pointing, or even just in verbal sparring, a more confrontational tone. These are ancient survival instincts playing out subtly, even when the threat is just a tough question or a disagreement.
And what about pacifying behaviors? I'm picturing someone nervously fiddling with their hair or rubbing their neck.
That's exactly it. Those are perfect examples.
Yeah.
These are unconscious self-soothing gestures that pop out when we feel stressed or insecure.
So, touching the neck, rubbing the forehead.
Fiddling with hair or jewelry, wringing hands, maybe excessive yawning, rubbing down the legs, sometimes called leg cleansing, or even pulling at clothing collar like ventilating.
Trying to cool down.
Metaphorically, yes. These are all the body's unconscious attempts to calm itself down when it perceives a threat, even just an emotional or social one.
So, is there a general principle, like maybe we expand when we feel good and contract when we feel bad?
That's a really good way to frame the core principle of protective versus expansive gestures. Generally, yes. Our bodies tend to take up more space, to expand, when we feel comfortable, confident, or dominant.
Like leaning back, arms spread wide on a chair, or that steepling thing people do with their hands.
Exactly. Conversely, we tend to contract, to make ourselves smaller, when we feel unhappy, threatened, or submissive. Think crossed arms, hunched shoulders, maybe pulling the head down slightly, like turtling in on oneself. These unconscious movements signal confidence or defensiveness.
And what about hands and feet? People often forget about those, but they can be really telling, can't they?
Couldn't agree more. They're often less consciously controlled. Wringing hands frequently signals doubt or anxiety. Happy feet, bouncing or jiggling feet can indicate genuine positive feelings or excitement.
What about pointing towards the door?
Feet angled towards an exit often betray a desire to leave the situation. Crossed legs can sometimes signal closing off or feeling defensive, though context matters there too.
And even just the voice. You mentioned tone earlier, but can the voice itself act like body language?
In a way, yes. Subtle shifts in pitch, volume, speed, or even breathiness can indicate underlying muscle tension or relaxation. It's how we can sometimes hear a smile over the phone or infer someone's posture or level of tension just from their voice.
Okay, so it's clearly not about finding one magic tell. It's much more about putting it all together. Clusters and context.
Precisely. That's the key takeaway. No single gesture, no single facial flicker is definitive proof of anything on its own. The real art is in looking for clusters of messages.
Multiple signals pointing the same way.
Yes. Signals across the body, the face, the voice. Do they communicate a unified message? Is the overall pattern aggressive or submissive or relaxed or maybe deceptive? Also, establishing a baseline for how someone normally behaves is crucial.
What do you mean by baseline?
Just observing how they act when they're relaxed and comfortable. Then you have something to compare against. If someone who's normally very fidgety suddenly becomes unnaturally still, that's significant. Or if someone claims, "I'm fine," while tightly wringing their hands and avoiding eye contact, that incongruence is the real clue.
And context always matters.
Always. A gesture can mean totally different things depending on the situation, the culture, even the temperature of the room. Crossed arms might just mean someone's cold, not that they're defensive about what you just said. You have to consider the whole environment.
Okay, let's shift from these moment-to-moment tells to something more enduring. The enduring patterns. Personality models. This is where we look at those longer-term patterns of behavior, right?
Exactly. Personality, in this context, is really about a persistent pattern of behavior over the long haul. Understanding these general patterns provides really essential context for interpreting specific momentary actions. It helps us see the broader landscape of who someone is likely to be.
And probably the most widely recognized model for this is the Big Five personality traits, often remembered by that acronym OCEAN.
That's the one: openness to experience,
Right.
conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It's a really robust framework, widely used in psychology for understanding fundamental individual differences.
Okay, let's quickly run through them. Openness, that's about being willing to try new things, take risks.
Yeah, basically, high openness means someone is generally curious, imaginative, enjoys novelty and adventure. Think of Steve Jobs auditing that calligraphy class. That openness led to beautiful typography years later. Low openness suggests a preference for routine, familiarity, stability.
Got it. Conscientiousness. That sounds like being careful, organized.
It does. High conscientiousness means someone tends to be focused, reliable, goal-oriented, good at sticking to schedules, has decent impulse control. It's often linked to professional success and healthier habits.
And lower conscientiousness.
More impulsive, maybe more disorganized, less focused on long-term planning.
Okay. Extroversion. This one seems pretty straightforward, outgoing versus reserved.
That's the gist. Extroverts tend to be sociable, assertive, the life of the party types who draw energy from being around other people. Introverts, on the other hand, often prefer solitude or smaller groups, find social interaction draining, and recharge through quiet reflection. It's important to remember introversion isn't the same as shyness, though they might be perfectly confident, just prefer working alone or having deeper one-on-one conversations.
Right. Then agreeableness, how cooperative or kind someone is.
Exactly. Highly agreeable individuals tend to be sympathetic, trusting, cooperative, driven to help others. They're generally not cruel or overly selfish. Less agreeable people might show less interest in others' problems, might be more competitive or skeptical, sometimes perceived as less pleasant, though perhaps more direct.
Okay, and the last one, neuroticism. That measures emotional stability.
Yes, people high in neuroticism tend to experience negative emotions like anxiety, anger, or sadness more frequently and intensely. They might worry more, have quicker mood shifts, be more sensitive to stress.
Sounds tough. Is there an upside?
Well, sometimes that worrying can lead to proactive behaviors, like being diligent about health checkups or preparing thoroughly for potential problems. Those lower in neuroticism are generally more emotionally stable, calm, and resilient under stress.
And it's crucial to remember these are spectrums, right? Most people aren't at the extreme ends.
Absolutely. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle on each of these 5 traits. They're dimensions, not boxes. These are just
Well,
models to help us understand tendencies.
okay. Beyond the big five, there's also Kiersey's four temperaments, which you mentioned builds on the MBTI system.
Yes. David Kiersey took the 16 Myers-Briggs types and grouped them into 4 broader temperaments, each with sort of 2 instinctive roles or variants. He argued these temperaments reflect core motivations and talents.
What are the four?
First, the guardians. They tend to be concrete in their thinking, cooperative in achieving goals, value security, stability, and belonging. They're often strong in logistics, think administrators, inspectors, protectors. Kiersey estimated that guardians, along with the next group, artisans, make up a large majority, maybe 80% of the population.
Okay, guardians. And the second group, artisans.
Right. Artisans are also concrete, but more utilitarian or adaptable in achieving goals. They seek stimulation, value freedom and action, and are often strong in tactics, think operators, performers, promoters.
So guardians and artisans are more focused on the concrete world. What about the other two?
The other 2 are more abstract. Idealists are abstract in thought and cooperative in pursuing goals. They seek meaning, identity, significance, and are often strong in diplomacy, think mentors, advocates, counselors.
And the last one, rationals.
Rationals are abstract and utilitarian. They seek knowledge, confidence, mastery, and are often strong in strategy, think coordinators, engineers, architects of systems.
So these temperaments seem to offer a slightly different lens, showing how different traits might cluster together based on core motivations.
Exactly. They can provide a more nuanced understanding than looking at MBTI types in isolation. But again, it's crucial to remember no one fits perfectly into just one box. Most people show traits from multiple temperaments.
Then speaking of the MBTI itself, you mentioned its 16 types derived from those four dichotomies. Extroverted, introverted, sensing intuition, thinking feeling, judging perceiving. What's the key takeaway from MBTI for our purpose of reading people?
Well, while it's popular, its scientific validity and consistency are debated. People can get different results at different times. For our purposes today, perhaps the MBTI's most useful insight isn't its specific 16 types, but rather the very fact that it highlights the limitations of static labels. It reminds us that human behavior isn't always fixed. Someone might test as an introvert one day, but act quite extroverted in a situation where they feel comfortable and passionate. This reinforces our core lesson. Rely on active, ongoing observation of actual behavior and patterns, rather than just assigning a fixed label and assuming it explains everything.
Got it. Labels are shortcuts, not the full story. And a quick mention of the Enneagram. What does that add to the mix?
The Enneagram is another popular model, outlining 9 core personality types: reformer, helper, achiever, individualist, investigator, loyalist, enthusiast, challenger, and peacemaker. It's often used more for self-awareness and personal growth.
So how does it help in reading others?
For our purposes, the Enneagram is often less about predicting what someone will do, and more about understanding the underlying why, their core motivations, fears, and desires. Knowing, for instance, that someone identifies as an achiever, type 3, might suggest their drive stems from a deep need for validation and fear of worthlessness. That gives you a much deeper insight into how to genuinely connect with or motivate them, going beyond just their surface actions.
Okay, so the overarching theme here seems to be the model mindset, right? Remembering these are just tools, not rigid definitions.
Couldn't agree more. That's absolutely critical. They are models and simplifications, useful frameworks, but not definitive categories that perfectly capture a person. We have to constantly gather new data through observation and be willing to adjust our perceptions.
Can you give an example of adjusting?
Sure, you might initially observe someone's forceful, direct style and think, okay, Enneagram Type 8, the challenger. But as you observe more, maybe you see their highly analytical approach, their focus on competence. You might refine that. Perhaps they align better with Kiersey's rational temperament, or a Big Five profile high in conscientiousness and lower in agreeableness. It's about staying flexible and integrating new information, not sticking rigidly to your first impression or model. That adaptability in your analysis is really key.
Okay, that makes sense. We've covered the hitting drivers, the visible cues, the enduring patterns. Now let's get really practical. Spotting deception and observing actively. Let's be honest, this is the part everyone wants to know how to spot a liar.
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But the truth is, it's notoriously difficult. Research consistently shows that most people, even trained professionals like police officers or judges, are astoundingly bad at it. Often no better than flipping a coin, like 50-50 chance.
Wow, really? Even professionals? Why is it so hard? What makes lie detection such a challenge?
Several reasons. For one, experienced liars can consciously control some nonverbal cues. If they know fidgeting looks suspicious, they might make an effort to sit perfectly still.
Countermeasures.
Exactly. Also, there's no single universal sign of deception, no Pinocchio's nose that always gives it away. And maybe most importantly, many behaviors we associate with lying, like nervousness, sweating, avoiding eye contact, can also just mean someone is anxious, stressed, uncomfortable, or even telling an embarrassing truth. The signals are ambiguous.
So you can easily misinterpret nervousness.
Very easily.
Yeah.
The stakes are often high for the liar, too, so they might be hyper-focused on managing their presentation, which can itself look suspicious even if they're telling the truth under pressure.
Okay, so if there's no magic bullet, how can we get better at spotting deception? It sounds like we need to shift focus to strategic conversations for truth.
That's a much more effective approach. Think of it less as lie detection and more as a dynamic, conversational skill aimed at uncovering the truth.
What does that involve?
One key strategy is to keep your own information disclosure to a minimum, at least initially. Let the other person do most of the talking. This gives someone who is lying more opportunity to, well, trip themselves up with inconsistencies.
Let them hang themselves with their own rope, so to speak.
Sort of. Liars often come prepared with a complete rehearsed story. They might deliver it smoothly all at once, but then they often struggle with follow-up questions, especially unexpected ones. They might take longer to respond, stumble over details, or have to invent things on the spot.
Whereas truth-tellers.
Truth-tellers usually reveal information more gradually, piece by piece as they remember it. And they can typically handle follow-up questions much more easily because they're just accessing real memories, not constructing a narrative.
So asking random, unexpected questions can really throw a liar off their prepared script.
It absolutely can. You're using the element of surprise. You're also increasing their cognitive load.
Cognitive load, making their brain work harder.
Exactly. It takes significant mental effort to maintain a lie, keep track of details, monitor your own behavior, and gauge the listener's reaction, all while suppressing the truth. Spontaneous liars are generally worse liars. If you can ask questions casually, quickly, maybe out of sequence, before they can fully prepare or regroup, you increase the chance their carefully constructed story will start to unravel under the strain.
Okay, so taxing their brain is key. What are some other specific techniques to increase that cognitive load and hopefully get closer to the truth?
Well, simply keep them talking. Ask open-ended questions that require detailed answers. Gently probe inconsistencies you notice. Earlier you said X, but now you're saying Y. Can you help me understand that?
Putting gentle pressure on the cracks.
Right. You could even strategically state something you know to be untrue yourself just to see how they react. Do they correct you or just go along with it? Another useful technique is to ask them to recount a story you know is true, something mundane. This helps establish a baseline for how they normally communicate when being truthful.
And while you're doing this, what are you looking for?
When a liar is under high cognitive load, you might notice more signs of strain. Look for emotional detachment in their verbal narrative, even if the topic should be emotional. And then watch for how real emotions might involuntarily leak through nonverbal channels. Maybe increased blinking, pupil dilation, more speech errors like stutters or slips of the tongue, or subtle shifts in body language we discussed earlier.
So to sum up the general tips for better lie detection, focus on patterns and inconsistencies over time, not just isolated cues. Listen for stories that seem overly long, too detailed, or strangely lacking in emotion. And maybe trust your gut instinct as a starting point, but always seek corroborating evidence before jumping to conclusions. Okay, that's helpful. Moving on from deception specifically to broader observation skills, using the power of observation, thin slicing, and more. Think slicing sounds intriguing, like something out of Sherlock Holmes.
It kind of is. Thin slicing is a real psychological concept. It refers to our ability to make surprisingly accurate, quick judgments about people or situations
Mhm.
based on very minimal amounts of information, just thin slices of experience.
Can you give an example?
The classic one is researcher John Gottman. He became famous for being able to predict with something like 95% accuracy whether a married couple would still be together in 15 years just by observing them interact for about 5 minutes.
5 minutes? That's incredible. Did observing longer help?
Interestingly, no. His accuracy actually tended to drop if he observed them for longer periods. It suggests our rapid unconscious processing can sometimes pick up on crucial patterns very quickly.
So our initial intuition, that gut feeling, can actually be pretty accurate sometimes. But we shouldn't rely only on that, right? There's bias to worry about.
That's the crucial balance. Thin slicing shows our intuition can be powerful, but it's also prone to biases and stereotypes. The best approach is often to combine that initial intuitive hit with deliberate, conscious observation. Let your brain make its quick judgment, acknowledge it, but then actively gather more objective data to confirm or correct that initial impression.
Okay. And part of that conscious observation involves paying attention to the words people use.
Absolutely. Word choice can be incredibly revealing, even in texts or emails. Look at things like pronoun usage. Lots of I versus we can indicate self-focus or perhaps insecurity. Emotional intensity in language. Use of jargon, is it appropriate or are they trying too hard to sound smart? Even the types of metaphors used, like military or hunting terms, can reveal underlying worldviews. Or notice if someone consistently avoids causal terms, maybe deflecting responsibility.
Fascinating. And just like Sherlock, we can also read appearance and possessions. What can we glean from those?
This is a rich area for observation. Start with photographs. Can you distinguish a genuine smile, the Duchenne smile, that involves the eyes from a forced, polite Pan Am smile? Research suggests that people who show more genuine smiles in photos tend to have better life outcomes down the road.
Interesting. What about clothing?
Clothing is always making an identity claim, consciously or not. Look at the level of effort put in. Are there markers of status or wealth? Crucially, how does their clothing align with the context? Someone wearing expensive jewelry while working on a messy construction site is sending a complex message about their priorities, or perhaps their disconnect from the situation.
And our homes, they say a lot too, don't they?
Definitely. Homes are often direct extensions of personality. Observe the home and possessions. Is it open, messy, welcoming, or meticulously neat, maybe almost sterile? The presence or absence of certain items, books, art, photos, collections, and the overall decor can reveal values, hobbies, mental state, even aspirations.
Is there research on this?
Yes. Sam Gosling did fascinating research showing you can make surprisingly accurate guesses about someone's personality traits, even their political leanings, just by looking at their bedroom or office. For example, he found conservatives tended to have more organizational items, calendars, flags, and more conventional decor, while liberals tended to have more books, diverse music collections, art supplies, and generally more clutter or color.
Wow. Okay, what about our online behavior? Everyone puts on a curated front on social media, right? So how much can we really tell?
Well, while there's certainly some curation, studies surprisingly suggest that people's online profiles, especially on platforms like Facebook, tend to reflect their real selves more accurately than an idealized version. Yes, certain traits seem easier to spot online. Conscientiousness and extroversion tend to be more obvious than, say, neuroticism. Even email habits can offer clues. Consistent late-night timestamps might indicate a night owl, and some research has tentatively linked chronotypes to personality traits, including, controversially, the dark triad traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, which tend to correlate slightly with evening preferences.
Oh, and profile pictures.
Profile picture emotions can also correlate. People high in openness or neuroticism might choose more neutral expressions, while those high in agreeableness or extroversion tend to choose pictures with positive emotions like smiling.
Okay. And quick observations in the workplace. Can something as simple as a handshake really tell us something meaningful?
Yes, surprisingly. Studies suggest handshake quality firm versus limp. Who initiates, who breaks contact, can correlate moderately with traits like conscientiousness and extroversion and influence first impressions significantly. That limp, dead fish handshake often leaves a negative impression, fairly or unfairly.
And you mentioned social media predicting job performance.
Yeah, interestingly, some research suggests that analyzing a candidate's social media profile, ethically of course, can sometimes predict their future job performance more accurately than traditional methods like reviewing resumes or even personality tests, perhaps because it gives a broader, more authentic picture of their interests, engagement, and communication style.
Okay, this has all been mostly about passive observation, but we can also be more active in trying to understand people, right? Let's talk about active observation, the power of indirect questions. This sounds like a clever way to get past people's usual defenses.
It really is. Direct questions often elicit guarded or socially desirable answers. Indirect questions, however, can often bypass those filters and get people to reveal deeper, more honest information about their true values, motivations, fears, and self-perception, sometimes without them even realizing how much they're sharing.
This section in our source material had a great list of these clever indirect questions. Can you highlight a few of the most powerful ones, the ones you find particularly revealing?
Absolutely. There are many good ones, but a few really stand out for unlocking deeper understanding.
Okay.
First, asking something like, what kind of prize or reward would you work hardest to win? And conversely, what punishment or negative consequence would you work hardest to avoid?
Back to pleasure and pain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This gets right to their core motivations, their values, how they perceive positive and negative incentives, what truly drives them both towards something and away from something else. It's incredibly revealing.
Okay, that's a good one. What else?
Another really insightful one. What do you consider your most personally significant and meaningful achievement? And also, what has been your most meaningful disappointment or failure?
Why is that so powerful?
Their answer sheds so much light on their self-identity. What do they value about themselves? What do they see as their strengths? Where have their hopes and expectations been met, and where have they fallen short? It really reveals their relationship with success, failure, and their own narrative.
Okay, achievement and disappointment. Give me one more really potent one.
How about this? If your house was on fire and you could only save one thing, assuming all people and pets are already safe, what would you rescue?
Ooh, the fire question. What does that tap into?
It gets at fundamental values and how someone might react in a crisis. Would they grab something practical, like a laptop or passport, something irreplaceable and sentimental like photos? Their choice strips away the everyday clutter and reveals what truly matters most to them when everything else is potentially lost. Is it practicality, connection, memory, freedom?
Those are incredibly insightful questions. We'll definitely make sure the full list from our sources is available in the show notes for everyone listening.
That's a great idea. And the key with all these indirect questions, really, is to listen beyond just the literal surface answer. Pay attention to the emotions, the reasoning, the underlying motivations that the answer reveals. That's where the genuine insight usually lies.
So let's wrap this up. We've covered a ton of ground today. This whole deep dive was really about equipping you, the listener, with a better toolkit, more perspectives, more techniques to become a more astute observer and analyst of human behavior.
And while human beings are incredibly complex, hopefully, we've shown that the skill of reading people isn't magic. It's absolutely learnable, and it's something you can continuously refine with practice and awareness. It's really about becoming a better student of human nature, staying curious, always observing, always learning.
And maybe we can leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. As you think about applying these models and techniques to understand others, consider flipping the mirror. How might understanding these concepts offer you deeper self-awareness? What unconscious motivations, what defense mechanisms, what personality traits might you be subtly projecting or revealing through your own everyday behaviors, your word choices, even your online presence? Something to think about.